Really appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Again, my name is James. Thanks so much for that that introduction. It's uh, really cool to be here. It's always great talking to folks of global knowledge. Yeah, that's a picture of me as I was up paddling in a kayaking in a river there, and we made it to a waterfall. Couldn't get past it. We had some good times there. So you'll see pictures of places where I've been, both in the U.S. and the U.K. Throughout this presentation. Let's see, we've got a hold of each other here for about the next hour. Let's see. It's 7:34 a.m. my time. I think it's about what, 3:30 London time. Is that right? 3:34, something like that. I'm curious where you're all calling in from. So grab the chat window and see if you can tell me where you're calling in from. I'm just very curious. Again, I'm in Olympia, Washington. That's not Washington, D.C. That's Washington State. It's on the other part of the U.S. on the left-hand side. So today, folks, we're going to be talking about securing today's virtual environments. Before we do that, Tony DeLond is going to be with us a little bit later on. Just wanted to, Tony and I were talking. He has a PFD, personal flotation device, just like this one. So we, great minds think alike. So you'll be hearing from Tony a little bit later on. For those of you who don't know who CompTIA is, it's not CompTIA or CompTIA or anything like that. We're a trade industry association. We're a global not-for-profit trade IT association. We do a lot of education. We do certification. If you've heard of A+, Network Plus, Security Plus, many other pluses, CYSA Plus for analytics, Pen Test Plus. We have a lot of things covered in terms of cybersecurity. We do a lot of philanthropy around the world and a lot of personal networking. So you can learn more about CompTIA at CompTIA.org. So today, folks, the agenda. Thanks for letting me know where you're calling in from. Our agenda, we're going to talk about this phrase, ambient computing, just for a second. It's one of those fancy phrases. You'd call it an out-of-town phrase or a $3 phrase if you're in the U.S., maybe a £3 phrase. The idea being it's kind of new, but it's an important one to understand. What IT is all about these days today, your place in an organization's cyber chain. And I'm using that term very advisedly, cyber chain. You'll understand what I mean in just a second. And skills and organizations, skills that organizations need today, etc. So there you have it. And then we'll be talking about addressing those skills gaps. Well, let's talk about this ambient computing world and what it means to support today's virtual environments, or the tech needed for the fourth industrial revolution. How about that? I'm using all sorts of fun buzz phrases today, aren't I? So let's talk about what ambient computing means and what this fourth industrial revolution means. That picture, by the way, let's see, I took that in Tokyo here not too long ago, just before the COVID pandemic. I was there in January. Was it January or February? February. And I couldn't help but see that, I was getting onto a bullet train. It was very cool. The world that we live in, folks, is something that is full of tech. Okay. Wow. What an insight, huh? But this tech more and more is processing us and boxing us in a sense. By boxing us, it means that we as human beings, the data that we generate, it gets turned into information. And I'm making a distinction there. Data is stuff that is generated by machines, by us. Information is stuff that gets processed in one way and turned into actionable, useful intelligence, business intelligence, that sort of thing. The reason I bring all of this up is more and more as we go down the street, as we get up in the morning, move from environment to environment, we're put into a context. And that context is our daily lives. Starting 30 years ago, 20 years ago, we all started talking about cookies on the web, and they would kind of capture information and make a web session more useful. Well, cookies are still used. Well, we're talking about a massive change from that, because now the information that we generate, whether it be in our activities on the web, activities as we drive down the road or whatever, we're being monitored, we're being processed, and artificial intelligence and machine learning and IoT are all part of this. So IoT, that smartwatch that you have, that webcam, whatever device you have that's activated. For example, I have Philips lights. These lights have a little computer in them, little IoT devices in them, and I can use them remotely. Well, I know that Philips is also using the data that I generate to capture that, to turn it into intelligence. That's what ambient computing is all about. It's in the air. And as companies become information companies, You know, Philips isn't just, I don't mean to pick on Philips, but as a company that sells light bulbs becomes an information company, just as much as they are a company that sells light bulbs, or just as much as a smart watch company becomes an information company due to the information they grab from us, they have to protect that. As we are in all of these virtual environments, and as that information about us gets stored and transmitted, it needs to be stored, that data at rest needs to be stored properly, it needs to be transmitted properly. So as things move from environment to environment and from machine to machine, we basically, you know, can this be used for contact tracing, for control, or for hyper personalization? As you move from one environment to the other, that new environment is configured for you. Your workstation's ready to go. You get the idea. It involves data analytics, business intelligence, more importantly, identity. The identity that you have. And so as cybersecurity workers, to cut to the chase, our job in this new fourth industrial revolution is to protect identity, is to protect information that we generate. By fourth industrial revolution, I mean this. In the first industrial revolution, a couple hundred years ago or more, we realized as human beings that we could we found steam, and we could process steam and other forms of energy and create cool things, okay, and create the factories of that day. Then it was beyond steam. It was moving into electricity and mass production. That's the second industrial revolution, you could argue, the second phase of it. Again, from steam moving into electricity and mass production of everything. Well, you get into the, that's, you know, that takes us into the, you know, late 19th, early 20th century, mid 20th century. By the mid 20th century, you got the third industrial revolution. That's information, okay? The information age that we've been living in. We're rapidly, excuse me, rapidly moving in to the information age plus cyber physical systems, plus artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's the fourth industrial revolution. So again, the information age meets AI. The information age meets IoT, okay? We've come quite a ways. That's a picture of my dad standing. He's got an old, it's called a dictaphone. That's what it's called. Those three machines there, lawyers used up clear up until probably about the 1950s, maybe even the early 60s, more like the 1950s around the world. One of those machines, the middle one, nope, not the middle one. The one on the edge there it records. That's you spoke into that little thing, that little horn there, right? The second one did the recording. The third one did the erasing. Now imagine how things have miniaturized, right? You know, that you're looking at a voice capture device that was used for decades, right? Things have changed a little bit since then. What we're finding is that emerging tech, and people call this emerging tech because it's IoT that generates the information, the data. We've got artificial intelligence processing that data and all that. We're finding in our surveys that basically this emerged tech, I like to call it emerged tech because it's not emerging, folks. It's there. It's ready. It's ready to be used. Go up to Microsoft Azure, AWS, Alibaba, whatever cloud service you want to talk about, IBM Cloud, AWS, whatever. Those things are there, they're available. And these are seen today as revenue drivers. So a second thing I'll bring out is not only are we guardians of identity, and when it comes to cybersecurity workers, we're also people who help bring companies to profit or bring companies to relevance if they're nonprofits or whatever. These are drivers that build success for companies. They're building blocks for our ambient computing world. So here's some real quick thoughts about emerging tech before I move on. There's kind of a reality check here to think about. There's technology innovation, very bleeding edge and all that. And then there's technology adoption. In other words, when companies actually start using this stuff. Case in point, the cloud may not seem like an emerging technology, but because we've been talking about it for 15 years, probably longer. I think the term was coined in the 90s. We've been talking seriously about it for quite a long time, but we've only been implementing this in a serious way, really, over the last 5 years, I would argue. And I'm not the only one that would argue. It's the research that we're finding. So I want to point out this innovation cycle. I've been lucky enough over the years to see lots of tech come on into this innovation cycle. This is a classic Gartner cycle. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there's basically some form of triggering event and everybody gets enthused about whatever technology it is. I saw Linux take this trajectory, and Linux could do no wrong and could solve COVID even, right? And then there was kind of a common sense correction, like, well, it doesn't really do all that. And then people like, oh yeah, that's yesterday's news, or it's not useful or whatever. And then companies start adopting it. There's kind of this, they call it the slope of enlightenment, Gartner does. And then the technology is mature and everybody ends up using it. So for example, our Androids are Linux systems, right? I think we all know this. The Androids that we use are basically Linux. And I've seen this happen with all sorts of technologies. There's even the concept of wintering I will bring up very quickly. Sometimes a technology, something even as broad as AI, kind of goes through this little this little trajectory that you're seeing. And then it kind of is forgotten about a little bit, or, oh, well, it needs to be thought about a little bit more. That's called wintering. And then it goes through this cycle again. And I've seen AI through various permutations over the years go through that cycle. So whether it be the cloud, Linux, AI, all sorts of things. And these are some examples of the workplace where technologies that go through an initial surge of enthusiasm and then, oh, well, it's not all that. But then it starts kind of maturing and people start using it. So just through some examples, just wanted to throw you some examples here. This is as of July of this year, what Gartner sees as being, kind of overhyped, and then it actually becomes implemented. So the cloud office, for example, enterprise social networking applications, they're being used and they're more mature. The other ideas are going through some form of cycle on this. This here is emerging technology in general. Now, I don't want to emphasize all of this too much. I do want to emphasize, though, that most organizations, whether they're large companies, small businesses, they usually are late majority adopters. In other words, there's the innovators and the early adopters and all that, and that's groovy. That's fine, right? But when it comes to practical application of services, it's that kind of late majority feel that we have. Okay, so after all of this, what does it mean to secure today's virtual environment? Well, the answer is, well, what is IT all about today? And it's really about these four pillars. If you look at the kind of bottom right-hand side of things, where of this slide, this is research that we've done at CompTIA, and I'm kind of bringing a couple of reports into it. We have basically identified at CompTIA the infrastructure pillar of IT and the development pillar of IT, security and data. Those are kind of four pillars that prop up IT today. So I wanted to bring that, give you a general idea of what's going on. But then we do research and we basically asked IT workers and business people, what are these emerging tech? What is this emerging tech in our virtual world that's so important? Select 3 technologies that you think have the most potential for business. And for the first time, AI went to number 1. Usually it's been IoT over the last few years, or various forms of networking, or ways in which the cloud is used. Serverless computing, for example, is the use of the cloud. And instead of installing a Linux system in the cloud, kind of doing lift and shift, where you, instead of lifting and shifting a Linux system that's in a data center somewhere or a server room somewhere and then popping it up on the cloud, it's basically, well, we can use Docker and Kubernetes and provide the services that Linux system that was, in the on-premise world was being used. And we can apply those services and get them going without actually having to start a Windows or a Linux server. That's what serverless computing is all about. So these are the things that businesses today see as very important for their potential. And it's very similar to how IT workers see things as well. But I wanted to point that out because AI is not on its way, folks. Machine learning is not 3 to 5 years away. It's back in the day. I remember, oh yeah, it's before we start using artificial intelligence, it's 3 to 5 years away. Well, it was 3 to 5 years away for 20 years. That's not the case now, folks. It's happening right now. This is a screenshot I happened to grab from AWS. If you click on a few things, spend a couple hours, you can begin, I'm not saying it'll be ready to go, but you can begin to enlist machine learning services and apply them to your business processes, apply it to your computing environment, whatever you want to call that, to your IT department today. It's not cheap necessarily, but these are things you don't have to go to somebody at University of Cambridge or Caltech or whatever to get going. You can get them going right now. We're seeing artificial intelligence, for example, in cybersecurity, where it's enhancing pattern recognition. It's giving us good threat feeds that can in a very pointed way say, well, James, we've analyzed, our AI engine has analyzed the business that you're in at CompTIA. And that's, you're in a different business than a banking company or a manufacturing company or whatever. And it can basically do some interesting tailored information, right? But when it comes to understanding AI, how do we make sure that AI doesn't have bias in it, racial bias, for example, or bias about improper information that just isn't working? And how do we make sure that the data we feed AI, because artificial intelligence, machine learning, you always have to prime that pump with information. How do you know that that information has true integrity, that somebody hasn't been messing with it? So there are all these services that are available right now, whether it be artificial intelligence, managed blockchain, etc. But how do we protect it? Now, it can be used as a hunter. There are so many tools out there. Splunk, for example, open source tools such as Alien Vault. There's so many tools out there that use artificial intelligence today, right now. There are so many help desks that use conversational AI and recommendation engines all day long, okay? So it's changing the face of IT today. But more and more, as the information that creates our modern world is happening, we basically have pillars of modern identity that are being attacked, folks. I mean, credit agencies. And I'm not talking about a particular bank. I'm talking about, at least in the United States, for example, attacks on the very people who grant credit, who create our credit histories or online. As that pillar gets attacked, that's a major pillar, not just of IT, but of our society, okay, of our modern identity. As we see healthcare, that's another major pillar of not IT, sorry, of the world getting attacked constantly, of voting, our election infrastructure, all these things. Cybersecurity workers are needed to help do this. Now, to help solve these problems. Now, artificial intelligence can be used. For example, there's Amazon Detective. I just happened to be up there and I noticed that there's an engine there, artificial intelligence engine, that can identify potential unique issues. And that's cool. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, it's going to replace cybersecurity workers anytime soon. But one thing that it will do is that it will get rid of, I should say, take care of repetitive manual tasks and free up cybersecurity workers to spend more time on, frankly, more complex tasks. Okay. It helps us avoid repetitive work, focus on unique information. The thing is, hackers also want to attack AI. And so I just thought it was interesting back in the day, and even see companies today, they have workers that spend a long time looking at log files. Log files are everything to many companies still. AI will get rid of a lot of that kind of more manual work. When I say get rid of, we'll replace a lot of that. But it still doesn't mean that we don't need cybersecurity workers anymore. Let me move on real quick. The intelligence of things is very important. We have IoT devices, obviously, we've had them for years, but we're now finding ways to orchestrate things and automate things. So artificial intelligence gets involved in this. And in many ways, I would argue that automation includes artificial intelligence and things like the ability to orchestrate stuff using fancy tools such as Docker and Kubernetes, which frankly, what they do is they basically allow you to put things into, I'll call it buckets, as it were. Shouldn't use that term. It's an Amazon term, but you could basically create categories and create basically information technology services and launch them automatically. And you can manage them. It's pretty cool stuff. These are skills that we, excuse me, need today. We asked IT workers, okay, of all of this stuff, what's the most important? And the cloud very dominantly really was pointed out as being very important. And the answer is, well, the cloud supports this ambient computing world, the fourth industrial revolution, because as we generate all of this data, as we need all of these new cool services, we got to source them all from somewhere. So this data has to go somewhere, and we have to have really these cool new services for our virtual computing world. It has to come from somewhere. And rather than installing it as you did 20 years ago, it's ready to go in the cloud. So the cloud brings us ready-made platforms, available software, scalable services, all that groovy stuff, all that cool stuff that's supposed to bring us. It allows us to integrate installed or on-premise, traditional IT and the cloud. All these things it's supposed to do and does. Gives us access to data. That's the promise there. But it also brings us a huge attack surface. Okay. I took that picture, by the way, at the top of Helvellyn, if anybody's ever heard of that. It's a mountain in the Lake District. Actually, I was on Striding Edge when I took that. And I just thought it was kind of cool. Here's your lake in the clouds, right? There's your pool of information in the cloud. Get it? All right. Oh well. But the cloud can also represent something dangerous. Okay, if it's not managed right, okay, because it is another attack surface. This is Mount St. Helens in the United States. There's a volcano in the cloud ready to blow up. Get it? Right? So as cybersecurity workers, how do we fit in these days? And what do you bring to the table, okay, in regards to today's cybersecurity chain? And here's another term, and here's the definition. Today's cybersecurity chain is much different than it was considered 10 years ago, if it was even thought about at all. 10 years ago, or in a lot of companies today even, the cybersecurity chain involves some sort of person who wears a security hat and is worried about security and no one else is. Today's cybersecurity chain, hopefully, ideally, involves not only IT workers, but IT executives, business management, the IT management staff and staff, the CEO and the board of directors. So that represents an entire continuum, a larger continuum, right? And what we need you to do as cybersecurity workers is to bring your previous experience to the table. And by previous experience, I don't care if you worked in a warehouse. I don't care if you're a driver somewhere, Uber driver or whatever. We all have unique experience that we can bring to business because it helps us strengthen each link in the cybersecurity chain so that you can talk properly to boards of directors, to CEOs, to IT execs, to business execs, and partners. That's what outside firms means. If you want to learn more about what we've discovered in regards to main issues driving cybersecurity, we have our cybersecurity trends research. It's basically the cybersecurity report, the 2020 report, and there's a link there, and we can get you a copy of these slides as well, no problem. Yeah, thanks for the question. But one of the things that we found in regards to this issues that are really causing problems for this ambient computing world of ours is there's so many different ways that you can attack it. That's what I mean by attack surface. Attack surface is simply the idea that as you put some sort of resource up online, whether that be a person or a computer or a serverless instance or an instance of artificial intelligence, there are a lot of ways that you can attack it. And you are basically presenting something that can be attacked, something that is exposed. That phrase attack surface, we borrowed it. The IT industry constantly borrows stuff. And we borrowed that particular concept from the military, because they talked about the attacks. As an army goes out there, what is its attack surface? You know, is it the tanks that are being attacked, the planes, the people? How are the people being attacked? Additional concerns have to do with privacy. Talk about that in a second. There are a lot of hackers out there, and they seem to be they're using the cloud and artificial intelligence as well. So they're able to scale just as much almost, or maybe even more sometimes, as our cloud presence. We're relying more and more on data, and I would argue that that's reliance on information, okay? And so these are kind of the concerns. And so when you hear about concepts like risk management, security monitoring, incident response, all that, it really goes to understanding the different variety of attacks and how we can help privacy along. And this is important because these are pictures that I was able to take while I was in the UK a while back, last October, of the British Library, British Museum. As IT workers, we possess the data, okay? If possession is 9/10 of the law, it's an old phrase. IT workers are the ones that hold the data, the intellectual property. So the idea is that we are not necessarily just the custodians of this data, but we help manage how that data is used. And so we are at the table, and we need to be brought in at the table at the earliest possible moment as research and development or marketing or sales or any division of an organization goes to work, because we are the knowledge workers that make all of this take place and happen. As cybersecurity workers, there's basically data analytics type skills that we need to bring to the table, okay? For example, if you look at this little graphic here where it says data analytics, these are all analytics oriented activities that cybersecurity workers do today. So for example, they analyze logs. I showed you a copy of some logs that people use. We analyze information from artificial intelligence. We get reports. We get information from cybersecurity threat intelligence organizations. For example, CompTIA, we've recently become an information security organization that basically is a CTI threat intelligence feed. We provide information to members. As cybersecurity workers, we look for trending information and we generate actionable information out of that. That's our job. Our job as cybersecurity professionals is to get actionable information, not just geek out on cool tools, which I love to do. Our job is to take all these tools and create accurate narratives, to turn around to executive management and say, here's some things that you to think about as we go into this. And here's what I'm going to be doing to protect you as you source new solutions, et cetera. Because again, we're guardians of identity. We don't just guard data. We don't guard information, just that. We protect who people are and what they are in the modern world. That's our job. So when it comes to cybersecurity and privacy, there's kind of two closely related concepts. They're not the same concept. Privacy is a different concept than security. So this little kind of semi-Venn diagram kind of approach shows points of intersection where laws and standards are involved. And we need workers who can bring their experience, but also can learn about the importance of privacy, about what personally identifiable information is, about regulations, and how to map all of that to the technology being used every day, and to look for attacks. Now, we've done a lot of research at CompTIA, and one of those areas of research, we asked questions when companies are reluctant to use technology. What makes them reluctant to use it? Well, some people say, well, they didn't use a proper business case, or customers get confused if we throw too much new stuff at them, or I'm worried about the risk of it. It looks promising, but I don't know. And then people kind of budget constraints becomes, well, I don't see a clear business case, or I don't want to confuse people. So, or it's too risky. So it's just too expensive, right? There's all that, right? IT workers and security workers specifically are the ones that can help clarify what a product can and can't do, and the privacy issues. And so that you can, and that really takes care of risk aversion a little bit. It also helps take care of customer confusion. This is very much what cybersecurity workers are doing today, not just reading log files or, using Kali Linux or security onion, all these really cool tools. They're turning around and providing kind of consultative business knowledge about our virtual computing world. That's kind of our job more and more. Now, there are issues with securing emerging technology or virtual technology. So here's a place that was in New York. I was able to I had to jump over a little crevasse there, a gap, right? So here's a security gap. What creates cybersecurity gaps these days? Usually as we source something in the cloud, whether it be an artificial intelligence service, or as we source something or create code, we skip steps. Sometimes consciously. Companies do that. Well, it takes a long time, James, to follow things by the book, so we're not going to follow things by the book. That creates something called technical debt, and I'll explain that in a minute. There's, of course, shadow IT. Shadow IT is simply this. Normally, back in the day, if a part of an organization, let's say the sales department, wanted to get a customer relationship management piece of software going, they wouldn't do it themselves, because it's like, well, I'd have to get a server room and all these servers and the software and the license, all that, and the bandwidth. Well, today, it's much easier for any organization to go out and grab some sort of service because it's available as a service, right? You can go up to the cloud, and with a Visa card and a few hours, few people, you can get things going. Okay. IT may not know about it. The CIO, Chief Information Officer, she may not know about it, or he may not know about it. So that means we're not managing devices properly, that things, steps are skipped. There might be no or poor encryption or poor authentication. You get the idea. Sometimes this is done by accident. A lot of times it's actually done on purpose. So what we need is something to fill that gap. So, what steps can we take to solve these problems? And these problems involve really problems with the code that's been created or sourced, the complexity of connecting systems together, and monocultures. And I'll explain real quick what a monoculture is. We've discovered with COVID-19, right, that we all kind of are a monoculture worldwide, right? That there's a new virus that gets dropped in and it just can spread very quickly. Well, that's what a monoculture is in IT as well. If you have 1,000 of the same type of device or the same service, one vulnerability gets replicated 1,000 times, and it's a monoculture. And if you drop some sort of malware or some sort of issue into it, whether it be a virus or a worm or botnet or whatever that can take advantage of that, you've just created 1,000 or 10,000 of the same instance. Well, bang, now you are falling victim to ransomware or to DDoS attacks. You get the idea. So these are the kinds of issues that we try to resolve so that IT isn't toxic, that it's actually something that is helpful to the industry. So I've mentioned technical debt, which can lead to non-compliance, GDPR, or if you're in the United States, the California Consumer Privacy Act, every every country has all sorts of laws involved, right, that you have to comply to. But also, you don't want to make customers mad either. Oh yeah, I went and used that application that seemed cool, but now my information has been sold onto the dark web in one way or the other. Or it doesn't work right, doesn't perform right. Our job is to make sure all of these issues don't happen. So the reason why a lot of organizations kind of go, well, it takes us more time to make money if we implement this virtual computing, James, or cut this virtual world here because it's so complex. Well, actually, or security concerns or make it too difficult. See, our job is to solve those problems early on. Additional considerations include governance, and governance meaning the understanding of what it means to not just provide a service, infrastructure, or to secure it, that's cybersecurity, but to actually manage how private information is used. And there are all sorts of frameworks and risk management considerations, compliance steps. So we need skills. Okay, today we need red teamers and blue teamers. Red teamers are the ones that act as pen testers. We need security analysts, the people who listen for attacks and then can identify, hey, I know exactly how our AI is being attacked because I've listened for it. Very important. These are more than just business and intelligence analysts. We need security analysts who can basically model threats and do analytics, that they can identify how hackers work. This is a long-standing model of how hackers work. It's called the Lockheed Martin cybersecurity chain. This here is the MITRE attack model. I'm not going to go into details on these, but these are the types of models and skills that we need to learn today. Okay, that we need in cybersecurity workers to identify how hackers work. How do hackers use the tools that they have available to them? What techniques do they use? What procedures do they follow? These are the TTPs. You'll hear that. As you go into security training, you'll hear all about that. Or as your workers go into security training, you'll hear all about this. Cyber threat intelligence. What is that? Well, it simply means an organization or a group of organizations that have gathered together and captured really scintillating, timely, useful information, and then they find ways to share it via a taxi server or a Styx server. I don't want to go into the details, but the idea is we need workers that can take this intelligence that's given to them and go, well, how is that relevant to our company? And explain that to the CEO. We need people who can visualize these attacks, who can use some sort of tool to capture that information. I don't care if that tool is Wireshark or something called Zeek, it's an intrusion detection device, or Snort, all these things, who can slice and dice that information, then represent it in a way to identify trends and say, yeah, for all that data and all this stuff swirling around, that fog, what I call what the world calls the fog of more, too much information, that we can actually grab important and useful information. So to address the skills gap, folks, lots of different ways that we do it. And Tony Delon is going to be talking about this. We need workers who can understand how to identify attacks, threats, and vulnerabilities, who understand the architecture and design of today's virtual computing world, who can implement it, right? You're looking at the Security 601 certification domain. Security 601 plus 601 comes out a long time from now, November next month. 501 is out right now, and you can learn all of these things, okay, whether it be 501 or 601. But artificial intelligence is in the 601 exam now, right? Things about the idea of sharing information, about how to identify threat intelligence resources, how to use attack frameworks. All of these things are used on a daily basis. Another thing I'd like to bring up real quick before I begin going into, before Tony gives a presentation and we answer questions. Some research about what we found about the state of cybersecurity today. We're finding more and more organizations, whether they're small organizations, companies that have 20 workers in them or 120. That's a pretty big organization, actually. Or large organizations that have 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever workers. There's more specialization of cybersecurity roles. That doesn't mean that a little company needs to hire 10 cybersecurity workers, each with a different, set of skills and everything. Sometimes that's one person with separate skills, but nevertheless, there's specialization, meaning privacy, understanding of pen testing, understanding of analytics. That's what I mean by that. A lot of cyber roles more and more are getting kind of formalized because if you use examples such as GDPR, we need people who understand governance. What a term, governance. In other words, how can you make sure that a company is properly compliant so that a company can move forward with confidence? It's a really important concept to understand. Remote workforce ramifications, obviously, with COVID, but even before then, workforces have become more and more remote for a couple of reasons. First of all, the cloud makes those resources remote, doesn't it? But also we have been seeing a trend for using more remote workers even before people were forced to work remotely. And we're seeing, as a business continuity measure, more and more companies are realizing, well, there are times when probably in the future something like this might happen again. Or even if it doesn't happen again, that the remote workforce is something that actually is kind of useful if managed properly. So it's all about addressing business needs. Those are the major trends that we're seeing. And you can check out more information about this at the URL given here. It was released very recently in September. That's a whole month ago. And you'll find that a lot of that information is certainly relevant today. Another thing I wanted to bring up is the idea of networking. I think some of us are just starting out in cybersecurity or interested in learning more, or you are people who are managing or hiring, excuse me, cybersecurity workers. I think it's really important to get involved in networking. So I'm just throwing out there, work with people on whatever social engineering, wow, whatever social media platform you want to use. I tend to use LinkedIn. I see that as a business tool. You can join me if you want, James Stanger, or work with each other on this call and learn more about cybersecurity from each other. I'm a big fan of peer-based learning and networking in terms of cybersecurity. I think it's a very important concept. Now, what I want to do here is I've gone quickly over these things, and I plan on covering a couple of topics here, but I think it's now time. Tony, are you there? To hear from you, Tony. Tell us a bit about yourself, first of all, because you and I were talking about, we're both water dogs. That's what I call us. We like water, right?
You say that. It's interesting because that personal flotation device you use, I use it for a very different reason. I'm one of those guys out there who just never learned to swim. So yeah, I take that with me every time I go on holiday. That's my security for when I go out into the water.
It's all about risk management, right, Tony? I mean,
absolutely, absolutely. One of the nice things is I've been at Global Knowledge for about 8 years now. I started off in sales, and I kind of worked my way up to being a solutions architect a few years ago. Yeah. Which gave me a tremendous opportunity to work with our clients more closely. Not about, hey, what are you going to buy today, but how do I make this fit into your organization? And how can I take, those listening skills and that ability to shape, guide, and modify what we do to fit better into what you're trying to achieve as our end clients. So I'm currently the portfolio manager for Global Knowledge for cybersecurity. If we can just move on to the next slide. Best practice in DevOps, which is great because Global Knowledge is a hell of a company to work for. We like to brag, and for all those on the call, there's only just one slide on this. The thing that we're most proud of at the moment with CompTIA is that we are the EMEA Delivery Partner of the Year for 2 years in a row. We're really, really pleased about that. CompTIA give us a massive amount of value in the way in which we look at cybersecurity and the other areas, of course, that CompTIA follow. And the apprenticeship side of our business recently won the Rising Star Runner-Up Award as well. So it's completely integral to how we move forward in that cybersecurity message and the way in which we put that across. And the good thing, if we go to the final slide for me, I just wanted to briefly say that if you look at the cybersecurity stack for CompTIA, we're seeing huge demand for Security Plus. It's a great place to start. We're getting very large numbers from bigger organizations who think that cybersecurity should be something that very large numbers of people should be aware of. With that red team and the blue team, we cover that with both the Pen Test Plus tool and the Cybersecurity Analyst. Pick your side, pick your hat, pick your team. And then at the top there, you've got the CASP Plus, the Advanced Security Practitioner, which absolutely seems to be one of the in-demand qualifications for securing complex enterprise environments. It's for that advanced security professional. And if you want to show your organization and your peers that you are evolving in your cybersecurity journey, having the CompTIA cybersecurity qualifications alongside your LinkedIn profile, that's a really, really good place to start. Cool. So that's all I wanted to cover there.
Tony, you brought up something I just want to cover real quick. On the previous slide, you mentioned the importance of things like, at least you said something that triggered the idea of soft skills, right? The importance of not only just doing the cybersecurity stuff like that's found in CSP Plus. CSP Plus is so cool because instead of people going into management, like they might go into some sort of management-oriented certification, some workers, they want to stay, in that technical world, right? But let me take a step back about soft skills. And I think, Tony, I'm sure you've heard this before, that we need workers to understand what it means to liaise and work and network with individuals. Have you heard a lot of that before?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I'll use the phrase kind of T-shaped worker. And that's a phrase that's been around a long time. It's not my phrase, right? And the T-shaped worker is somebody who, think of the letter T, who has broad skills. And those broad skills, again, can be skills that you bring from previous lives. By previous lives, non-IT lives, or even in IT. And then you have some sort of deep skill that you've brought in. And that deep skill could include advanced security configurations, that's CSP Plus, or that skill could be blue team, which means you're listening for attacks and what the attackers are doing. But the idea is that you combine this with an understanding of writing skills, how to write. The first time I got a cybersecurity job, an actual cybersecurity job, it was almost 30 years ago. They said, James, we can tell that you know how to write, right? Which I was flattered. Back then I'd gotten a PhD in English literature. And so, yeah, I did know how to write, but I really wanted to become a cyber worker more than a writer. And, but they wanted somebody, because a lot of the workers then, and this is still the case, really either don't want to write or even don't really know how to write properly. And you can't just take a report from whatever tool you've heard of, some sort of analytics tool or whatever, and then just show it to a CEO. You've got to find a way to make people understand it. And that's just so important. Those kinds of skills, writing, project management, things like that. There's a question here that's a good one here. It's by an anonymous attendee, Tony, basically saying, I'm looking to start my cybersecurity journey. So would Security Plus be the best place to start? Couple of different answers to that. So Tony, you already said it very eloquently, that it is a great place to start. And one of the reasons why that is such an important place to start at cybersecurity is because it really gives what I call the lingua franca of cybersecurity. Tony, would you agree? It gives people that proper foundation to understand exactly each of the elements that you need to
Absolutely.
know as you
You
move
see,
on.
when you talk about the T-shaped individual there, James, you're
Yeah,
absolutely right. If you look at any of the foundation courses around best practice, project management, ITIL, in cybersecurity, it's about getting the language right.
yeah.
Get the language right at the very beginning, and that will stay with you throughout your entire career.
And Tony, the other thing to bring up uh, is when Security Plus is created, it's not just James's idea of what security is, or James and Tony, or a dozen people gathered around the room, designing curriculum or whatever. We literally have a process that brings in thousands, if not tens of thousands, but many, many thousands of people, and we distill and kind of, you could argue, crowdsource that information to create a body of knowledge, as it were, that is truly authoritative. So when you read those Security Plus objectives and you look at those domains, for example, I showed you the 601 domains. That's just not somebody's idea of how to present info. This is what the industry wants you to know. So I think that's a great question, anonymous attendee, because it is a great place to go. I said there are a couple of different answers, and Tony, I don't know if you'll agree with me on this. So the first answer, yes, start with Security Plus. The second answer, though, there are times when people have gaps in their knowledge. For example, they may have stormed right into networking connectivity, right? Which is cool. That means you learn about IPv6 and IP addressing and subnetting and BGP, all these fancy, cool networking things. But it may be that you've skipped over understanding endpoint knowledge. And by endpoint knowledge, I'm not just talking about Windows and Linux or whatever. I'm talking about all the different endpoints that you have to support out there. Printers, okay? Seems pretty boring, but trust me, they can be pretty important. Both hackers love to hack into them and people love to use them, right? Still, my point being, maybe before you get into Security Plus, it's possible that you need to address lack of networking. So take Network Plus, or address the fact that you don't really know endpoints all that well. Give you a case in point. I was talking to a lady one time. She's very savvy. She knows encryption. She's forgotten more about encryption than I'll probably ever learn. And I know a lot about it. And I was working with her, and she's like, oh, I need to get into this endpoint. What do I do? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? And she goes, well, I can't get the login screen. And I'm like, well, it was an older system. I said, well, hit Control Alt Delete. She didn't know that. So she knew everything about encryption and was very useful and really good, but she had that gap in knowledge, and I'm picking on her right now. But my point is, if she had taken A plus, she'd know that she wouldn't have to know, kind of go, oh, I don't know that area. So when it comes to cybersecurity, a very strong foundation is essential, because it allows you to avoid basic questions and allows you to emphasize the things that you want to emphasize without getting hung up. You know what I'm trying to say?
There's also another good point there you made,
Yeah.
James, at the very beginning about bringing the skills that you have from any other area into IT and into IT
Yeah.
security. We find this so often. If you have a good understanding of your business, if you know how that business
Yeah.
works, or the business of your clients, you can then apply security as a layer on top of that, because you can demonstrate to the client that you understand where their value chain is and how security fits on top of that to guarantee and support that.
That's a really good point. And I've seen people, look at the people who've called in from. We have people from Cardiff and Wales, great place. I've been there. Denmark, Orlando, Florida, North Carolina, from the Philippines, from Denmark, and how you doing, Joshua, from Nigeria, and Thor from Denmark. All of you folks, that's interesting you bring that idea of the value chain, right? I'm curious to see, one of the things that I will challenge each of you with, even the folks I haven't named, to challenge you to say, okay, look, take stock of what you have been doing, right? And how can it apply to these roles that we've been talking about? By roles, I mean things like security analyst or general security person, like a security administrator. That's what Security Plus can prepare you for. Take a look at the objectives. Take a look at the domains and start asking yourself, and don't intimidate yourself. Don't worry. Okay. There's room for you. Okay. And if there's skills that you don't possess, don't worry about that right now. We'll get you upskilled. It's the question of, do you have a real interest in learning this stuff? Do you, and don't worry, there's all these myths. I think it's important, Tony, for us to talk about these myths a little bit. I should have created a slide for it on this deck. There's so many myths, so many people like, well, I don't know. I didn't start cybersecurity at the age of 3, or I don't have a 4-year college degree. I can't get in this. Trust me, you can. Tony, do you talk to a lot of people about this? Like,
Absolutely.
where they can really start?
Absolutely. We talk to people at all stages within their career. It's not just people like ourselves who remember ZX81s and Spectrums and, other home computers. We've got young people coming up. I think that's why we've done so much work around the apprentice side.
Oh.
This applies to everybody. It's almost like if you think of industry today as a beautiful stained glass window in a church. Cybersecurity is a really important color in there. You have to be able to look through that and see everything in that particular sense. It adds value, it adds color, but it also sits alongside lots of other colors that add that overall value to both the individual and to the organization.
Great question. A great point. There's a couple of additional questions here. One of them has to do with from Elliot saying, I've already gained A+ network security plus, the big 3, right? I have yet to get a security-based role. Would you recommend doing CYSA first or Pen Test Plus first if I'm intent on doing both? That's a tough choice. But that's a tough choice. Maybe Pen Test Plus first. I don't know. That's one thing I would say. If you don't have good Linux knowledge, maybe Linux Plus or some form of Linux training would be useful for you. Okay, if you don't have that first, I'd also start to learn a bit of understand how programming works before I got into either of those. Just you don't have to be a programming genius. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying just a little understanding of that. So I think you could do that. Now the question: what is the basic? This is Pragadisuran. I'm saying that wrong. Sorry. The basic qualification to learn cybersecurity. In a general level, Prague, I would say first of all, if you're curious. But if you want to get more specific, I would say, focus on cyber security plus or one of those predecessor certifications first. There's another great question here about, as a senior person with a broad background, where can I start learning project management? CompTIA, we do offer Project Plus. There are a lot of other certifications or training programs out there that are very good ones. I would argue what's great about Project Plus is not just an IT cert, project management cert. It's a project management cert that would apply to anyone. And the great thing about it is it doesn't try to get you to be a total project management professional right away. It allows you to ramp up and get that appropriate level of knowledge. I'm glad you brought that question up. Boy, going back, Tony, what do you think, man? I mean, if somebody had to pivot on Pen Test Plus or CYSA Plus, which would you have them go into first?
That's a great question, James. And I suppose for me,
yeah,
I would always start with a target organization in my area that I want to work for. And then I would look for a job advert that details a job I want to do in the future. And I would look through the requirements that they are asking for. And I'd be thinking, okay, they're asking for Security Plus. They're asking for Pen Test Plus. Yeah. Let me work towards that so that I can match that profile in that target organization that I want to work for. And, it's funny because one of the things we've seen with CompTIA is that people are asking for these skills. They want to see these qualifications. They want to see that you're a member of these groups, that you are that T-shaped individual, and that you are involved in these conversations. You're part of these communities. I wish you all the best in your your career aspirations, but I do tend to start with, what does the market want from me rather than what I want to learn.
Great point. And here's let's get deeper into that, because I think it's a great point, Tony. One thing I find, though, a lot of people, when you read a lot of those job advertisements, there are a couple of things to think about. One, I call them job ads. I don't know what you want to call them, Tony, but you call them job requests. People putting out an advertisement for a position that's available, right? Don't worry too much if you don't know some of the skills that are listed in there, because a lot of times companies, when they list those kinds of, when they list skills, they'll go a little crazy. Do you know what I'm trying to say, Tony? They're like, oh, for
That's
you know,
HR,
for
isn't it?
yeah, for oh, you're
They've got,
blaming the HR folks now, huh? You're gonna
oh
get me in
yeah,
trouble, Tony.
they've got a
Yeah.
competency matrix and they want to tick every single box.
And they want to pay just a few pounds for it, right? Kind of thing. There's all that. When I say they, I don't mean just HR folks, but a company in general. In other words, don't get intimidated by the fact that, oh gosh, there's so much listed. I don't have that. Some of those things are kind of aspirational, like, you know, can we get this person with all these skills? If you can show that you have a certain percentage, and it can be a relatively low percentage of those skills that are listed, and then you can go in and they see that, wow, this, you know, Tony has a real spark of the divine, or Jarek, or Angelica really, yeah, I'm just picking names here. Titania from Canada really is somebody that, you know, their interests align with ours. Then you can get that gig. So that's my first thing about, don't get too intimidated by the job description. So that's something to think about.
Tony and James, I think if you have questions, then people are free to type them in the chat window, I think.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
if anyone has any questions, whether for James or for Tony or for both of them, that's also possible, of course.
Sure.
Please type your question in the chat window and Tony and James will be more than happy to answer your question.
Thanks, Renee. Cynthia is asking, how can I get a copy of this slide stack? No problem. Yeah, all these acronyms, right, Cynthia? Yes, we can get a copy. I think I made a couple last minute changes, Renee, to this slide deck. I'll get you a URL, and then you could forward it to everybody that's been on this call, if you want to do that, Renee.
Yeah, James, it is always with our webinars like that within the next days we send an email with
Good.
a link to the recording and with a link to the slide deck so that people can look at it, can listen to it at their own convenience. So what I would like to ask Cynthia and all other participants is to watch your mailbox closely, and you will get in the next days an email from Global Knowledge.
Thanks, Renee. There's another question from Prague. Forgive me for just using that abbreviation of your name. Do you offer any courses for cybersecurity? Yes, we do. At Global Knowledge, CompTIA and Global Knowledge, we do in fact, and the names would be course names could be Security Plus, for example. So yeah, you can learn more, and I'm sure Tony would be happy to help you with that.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Oh, these pictures. Where did these pictures come from? That one on the left, that's a grizzly bear. I took that, was it last year? I was hiking with my family and a grizzly bear came out and said hello. That was pretty cool.
Did you then run away?
My family walked away very briskly and I walked towards the bear. So, and
Wow.
then, you know, a couple of my kids like, Dad, get, you know, it's funny. For decades, it's been that, for many years, it's been that way. The kids kind of pulling me back from doing silly things. So I took a picture and then I walked away. And then that there is on top of something in Scotland called the Cobbler, or I think it's called Arthur's Seat. Is that right? Near Aracar, just above Glasgow. That's threading the needle. There, you have to climb through a little hole in that stone and then climb up. There are a bunch of German tourists who were saying, don't go up there. Don't. And I handed them my camera and said, take a picture while I wave at you. So there you go. Oh, here's a question. How's the balance between red team and blue team right now in the world 2020? You know, now a couple ways to answer that question, I suppose, Tony. One of them, in other words, how many workers do we need? Red? How many workers do we need blue? I would argue any good worker should have both understandings of how hackers hack, meaning to do those attacks, first of all, and also how to listen for them and stop them. That's the blue side. There are a lot more hackers, it seems, than cybersecurity workers. We have a major skills gap right now. And it's driving lots of other gaps, confidence gaps. In other words, a lot of organizations worldwide really can't move forward as quickly as they want because they don't have good security workers. So,
and James, we're seeing more and more reports now saying that there's going to be an enormous cybersecurity skills gap over the next few months and years.
Oh, no question.
Particularly with the industrialization of threat. You know, there are rogue states, there are organizations, universities, groups that are going out of their way to look for holes, look for ways in, almost like a hobby.
Almost like a hobby. And we also have, there are really interesting groups, bad groups of people who they don't necessarily even work for a state anymore. There's a lot of that state-sponsored stuff. Name whatever evil country you can think of, and they sponsor hackers. The other thing, though, is there are a lot of these people who used to work for a state. They've gone into business for themselves. And by business, I mean business. They make money, and they offer vacations and and benefits, and they're in business. So these gangs are pretty interesting. Prague has a question: do you offer any courses? How to register for the courses? So Tony, I think you could work with Prague, offline, to tell him or her more about how to register, unless you want to give any sort of.
James, we will contact Prague Disvaran separately and see what the required skills, etc., are. So we will do that separately.
Thanks,
and
Renee.
Explain how to register. Okay.
So Prague Disvaran, we'll get a hold of you. So thank you very much. Now I think we're at the time, or a little past the time for this webinar. Are we not, Renee and Tony?
Yes, we are.
So I better stop, and I'll turn the time over to you.
Yeah, I think you still had one slide to share.
Oh,
James?
I do. Oh, there I am. Hi, this is me with my mask. I was flying around. I flew to Florida, was doing some videos for Security Plus. So thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Renee. Tony, it's been great talking to you.
Thanks, James.
And thanks everyone from joining in from around the world to learn more about securing today's virtual environments. Really appreciate it. There's a few URLs from CompTIA blogs I've written over the last few months and even years, but mostly. But things about, I like to restore an old Land Cruiser I let get too rusty. I drew some analogies about how gained from conversations I've had from cybersecurity workers about how to implement, how to get rid of rust, or how to get rid of bad guys, and all that sort of thing. So that Land Cruiser is a 1975 FJ40, a 1975 Land Cruiser. So it's 46 years old now, I think.
They're really sought after now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are indeed. I can't drive it down the road without somebody, stopping and, hey, that's really cool. Even as bad a shape as it's in, I let it get in pretty bad shape because I spent more time having fun in it than fixing it. So since COVID, I've been fixing it. So.
Well, and thank you very much for your presentation, James. I would like to thank everyone for their time and attention. As indicated before, please watch your mailbox for an email from Global Knowledge with a link to the recording and with a link to the slide deck. And we are delivering more cybersecurity webinars this month. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So please feel free to visit www.globalknowledge.com for more cybersecurity webinars during the month of October. Thank you very much, everyone, and hope to see you in one of the next sessions. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.